Welcome to this online talk. My name is Ditte Ravn, and I am the community manager here at the Index project. So today we are going to talk about the societal changes that has been affecting the whole world, but also how it's been affecting impact entrepreneurs and their businesses. We'll very soon be joined by our 4 speakers tuning in from 4 different countries, and we are going to hear their observations and insights and their perspectives on what's ahead of everything that's going on right now. But I first want to start out by saying that we are very aware that this has been a difficult time. Oh, we have someone joining. It's Sarah here. She is coming in now. But I just want to say that we know this has been a really difficult time for all of you out there, both financially, mentally, and health-wise. We want to address these subjects with the utmost respect. We know that some have had opportunities, others haven't. Some have in very privileged positions, others are not. And we want to talk about this with reverence and kindness. Today is a space for sharing the good and the bad. And we really want to create a space where people can talk freely about these things. And if you guys have any learnings or insights you want to share with us, please do so in the chat. It would be very nice to hear from you guys as well. If you are coming from a company who are in need of help, we are also at the Index project right now offering support sessions where you can learn about how design thinking can help you and your company in these difficult times. But enough from me. I would like to introduce our 4 speakers. We'll start out with Dan Watson from SafetyNet Technologies, who's sitting in London in the UK. Dan, are you with us?
I am. Hi, Ditte. Nice to be here. Thanks.
Good. And there is yes. And then I would also say hello to Sahra-Josephine Hjorth from CanopyLAB, who is sitting in Germany, I believe.
Yes, there's been a bit of a traffic jam, stuck somewhere between Berlin and Nuremberg, attempting to teach my children about history. But I managed to find somewhere, and I hope the wind doesn't get too bad.
The background is beautiful. I gotta say that to begin with. But thank you so much for joining us. Then we have Jessica Collier from Spot, who is tuning in from Tahoe in California. I know it's very early for you, Jessica. Thank you so much for joining us.
Of course, thanks for having me.
Great. And lastly, we have Bibi from Airmotion Laboratories, who is in Singapore, where it, on the contrary, is very late. Hello, Bibi.
Yeah, Ditte, thanks for having me here.
Thank you so much for coming. We'll start out by hearing a little bit from each of our entrepreneurs here today. They have made some small presentations on them and their business and how they are doing, have been doing for the last 6 months. And we'll start out with Dan. So I'll hand it over to you, Dan.
Thanks, Ditte. Here we go. Let's see if we can share screen. All right. Can everyone see the screen okay? I have to do the normal Zoom stuff.
We can see it. It looks good.
Great. So this was me as a kid. This is kind of where my interest in the world and life started. Hasn't changed much. I still look like that most of the time. And really looking into sort of different things around design and problem solving with this sort of approach of finding things from an outside perspective and then honing in on a solution, which I think we more commonly refer to with these kinds of titles now around research, concept prototyping and design and iteration. Worked on a range of different projects, things from communications technologies or enabling people to control their communications, and also personal identity. Worked on some things that you probably shouldn't wear in the street because, well, it was called the anxiety suit. It would definitely raise anxiety among security forces, I think, if you were to go out in it. But the idea was about human interaction with emotions and symptoms. Did some stuff in the arts sector with dancing robots before moving into the space sector and looking at all things around satellites and technologies and how they can be used on Earth for good, which is really starting to look at this sort of blend between humans, technology, and business. It meant I got to work with some really beautiful things like space imagery, These are some of my favorites. Things like algae in the oceans from a great height, and also figuring out how you can calculate the crop yields over large areas and different image processing techniques, and even what things are in the ground that you can start to use in terms of commerce and manufacturing. And importantly, working with people and understanding how all these things fit together. So moving on to SafetyNet, which I'll speak more about in a second, that for me, the sort of the skill side of things was around this prototyping and the first-hand experience of problems and understanding user needs and building loads of different prototypes for things to trust, trying to solve the problems presented by the industry. And then working with a really wide range of stakeholders to understand what we as a company could provide and sort of fit into this space in the middle, this design innovation space around technology feasibility, business viability, and human values and how we knit them together. So what does SafetyNet do? Well, SafetyNet is a company based in London. We make marine electronics that fit into commercial fishing nets to tackle the problem of overfishing. But we've kind of distilled that a bit further now since we were at the Index Award last year, and we're talking more about precision fishing. So we have this finite resource and we need to figure out how to make best use of it. And we do that by observing the oceans, by measuring them and responding to those observations in a way that's useful by creating tools. So at Index, we were showing our device Pisces, which is our sort of response tool. So we started a bit backwards with the response rather than the measuring bit. But Pisces essentially uses visible light to attract and repel different species of fish so that you can catch only the right species that you want as a fisherman or fisher person. What it can achieve is something that looks like this. Essentially, on the left-hand side, you have a normal fishing catch with loads of bycatch. On the right-hand side, having applied the lights, you can see a much cleaner catch, up to 90% improvement in the catch there and sustainability. So we're starting to fit more things to fishing gears to achieve these goals of the measuring, observation, and response. And we do this with a hardware as a service model. It has benefits for sort of all the different people involved. The fishing crews get better catching and better regulatory compliance. We get money and data, which allows us to refine the way that we work. And I get to do it with this amazing group of people, a really extensive team, sort of business, engineering, science focused. They're wonderful. Aaron isn't always under his desk. He comes out and does some amazing work as well. And there's a couple of sort of mascots there in terms of cats and dogs. So the status quo for the company, we've just come back from furlough. We've been off for 2 months to weather the storm, sort of centered on the fact that the fishing industry has taken some hits, quite a lot of hits because of the COVID crisis. We learned a lot about each other, sort of pink unicorns, hats, and various pets over Zoom, as I'm sure lots of people have. And we've tried to get creative with our time as well in the time that we had down. Actually, ultimately sort of ended up working incredibly hard in terms of the strategic side of the company, even if it wasn't day-to-day activities. This is what's happened to the fishing industry, big slap in the face, lots of financial woes, led by our glorious leader, Boris Johnson, in our response to the COVID problem, which hasn't really helped massively. But we've had to respond to this essentially by looking at how we save money to keep the company afloat, where we can have real impact from probably around September onwards. We did this by involving our entire team in this process during the furlough side of things and how we were going to address this. I can talk more on this later, I think, but essentially we came up with a bunch of different routes to figuring out what the team sentiment was, what they'd tolerate, and how we could actually implement this in a way that made sense and was transparent to everybody in our company. And so Nadia Labs, our COO, produced a really great blog about this. But ultimately, this is what the UK looks like right now. We are leading Europe in terms of COVID cases, which is not a great place to be. We are maintaining our strangely sort of slightly xenophobic attitude towards help from Europe in terms of avoiding mass purchase of ventilators, and have some great guidance there about what to do with the virus. The first bit was a bit more straightforward. The latter four were less so. And we have an NHS that's done an amazing job that we clap for on a regular basis, but haven't really made material changes in terms of how we reward them. Just finishing up, Black Lives Matter has also had a presence here. We've had some really good upsides in terms of seeing some amazing stories coming out of it. But it has raised obviously big questions about how we move forward as a business as well as other people. Finally, lots of innovation funding, but the ever-present spectre of Brexit on the horizon means that we're still on this roller coaster through 2020 and looking forward to how everyone else is doing right now. So thank you for the chance to give an outline of what we're up to.
Thank you so much, Dan. That was, I love the fish gift It really did something for me, I think, and a lot of other people for explaining the industry.
Okay.
It's really good. And other stuff as well. And then I would like to, Sarah, if you can hear me, I would like to, can you tell us a little bit about you and how your company has been doing in this time?
Yeah, so my name is Sahra-Josephine, and I'm the CEO and co-founder of CanopyLAB. CanopyLAB is an adaptive learning company, currently with a headquarter in Copenhagen, but we also have offices in Vietnam and recently acquired a small publisher in Peru. So obviously COVID affects us enormously, both because it's accelerated e-learning from an emerging trend to a hyper trend and something that's going to stick. So with COVID, we launched a free online campaign to help educational institutions. And in a matter of 3 months, we've had 3,000 schools sign up for our waitlist. And we have over 1.8 million students on that waitlist. So it's really taken us from a place where people used to say EdTech grows slowly compared to other tech industries. It's been completely insane. And I think there are many facets of that. So first of all, what is it really that we do? So based on my PhD, we found a new way to create adaptive and also what we call personalized learning experiences that are curated to the individual. So we use a series of tests and algorithms to curate the learning flow towards you and your preferences. So for example, if all of us were to take a course on blockchain, we wouldn't have to go through the same boring process because we'd be able to detect what you know and what you don't know. So that's kind of a little bit of what it is that we do. And then we're working on something that's a little bit out there. We call it the self-building course. And I blame it, you know, I spent too much time at the NASA Ames Research Center because I'm also a part of something called Singularity University. And I think, you know, kind of, you know, spending a lot of years there, people said, you know, we're building a self-driving car. And I'm, you know, myself stuck here at a Tesla charging station somewhere in Germany. And I thought, if you can build a self-driving car, you can build a self-building course. So what we see with COVID is like there's actually an abundance of content, but it's not well planned out and it's not curated to the individual. So we mapped out how we in 4 stages could take any book at any given time or any video or any content and make it into a course. And we're actually almost there as well. So that's just sort of a little bit about like what we're doing. And in terms of, you know, how we're managing the current crisis, we're enormously happy that we're able to contribute and help people digitize, but it's definitely not problem free. I think just with our team, the people that are stuck in Lima, you know, if they go outside when they're not sanctioned to go outside, they're shot with water guns, and so it's very dramatic. So we're experiencing it in a lot of different ways, and we're seeing massive closing of schools. So for example, in South America, we're not even hearing about how many private schools are going bankrupt, how teachers are afraid to go to work, how they're afraid to teach, how they're being forced to use tools they've never used before, and they're given absolutely no training to do so. So it's a highly volatile market, but it is one with enormous, you know, a large amount of potential right now. And I think I'll end it at that for now.
Thank you so much, Sarah. Really interesting with how you say EdTech has just like massively grown during this time. I'd like to hand it over to Jessica. Jessica, can you tell us a little bit about you and your company?
Sure, let me share my screen. Oh, great. Can everyone see my screen?
No, it's not up for me. There it is.
There we go. Okay, great. So I'm the CEO of Spot. Spot. This is going to sound very self-evident and clear, but I think we haven't necessarily come to this conclusion until the last 6 months or so. Spot is a system that helps companies train employees and also gives them a way to help employees raise issues anonymously, and then the company can investigate those issues confidentially. Really for us, excuse me. For us, the main thing with Spot is having a safe, trusted, anonymous reporting tool for employees that is also actionable for HR. So we use an AI bot to help employees create thorough, accurate, really detailed accounts of what happened, and then use that bot to submit the report to the organization. One of the main things that we do very differently than other things that's on the market is to allow HR to follow up on reports anonymously minus human interaction. So, excuse me. So we use the bot to actually go back to the person who reported and say, hey, your company read your report. They really appreciate you speaking up, and they have some follow-up questions for you. And what we found is that people are much more willing to talk to a machine than to a human when it comes to these really sensitive, difficult workplace issues. We also do training. So we offer sexual harassment prevention training. We're about to release diversity and inclusion training, unconscious bias, bullying, microaggressions training. And we've designed it to be much more like Instagram stories than like these kind of cringeworthy, outdated videos that we're all accustomed to when it comes to these kinds of workplace trainings. And the thing that we've done kind of differently is to try tie training to reporting. So what we want is, as employees are going through this kind of mandated training, we want them to become comfortable and familiar with the very platform that they'll use to speak up when something goes wrong. So something that we're very proud of is that a lot of our larger customers, particularly in regulated spaces like the healthcare space, have implemented Spot alongside of more conventional tools like hotlines and web forms. You know, like you pick up a phone and you call, like, or at least in the US, you call a 1-800 number. And on the other end of the line is like a person and they ask you a bunch of questions. It's a very uncomfortable and increasingly outmoded form of dealing with these kinds of issues. And what we find is that when there's a bot that the company can use as a kind of neutral, non-judgmental third-party go-between between the company and the person speaking up, people are much more likely to engage in investigations and to answer follow-up questions and to really engage with the company to help them get to the bottom of what happened. So we actually see close to an 80% response rate in anonymous follow-up investigations. So a lot of what Spot does has really come to fruition in the last 6 months of this really wild, wild ride that we've all been on called 2020. So we started as a tool that was used almost entirely for harassment, discrimination, and related things like bullying. And in the kinds of early months of 2020, as COVID was starting to affect businesses, as we were starting to see a lot of shifts in how people work, we kind of started asking ourselves, are we really helping both employees and companies deal with as many issues as we could? And the answer was definitely no. So for most companies, only about 14% of issues relate to overt harassment and discrimination. And a lot of this is because harassment and discrimination are very difficult to both prove and define. So what a lot of companies end up dealing with in the bulk of the kinds of issues that employees need to raise are things like policy violations, ethical issues, misconduct that's not necessarily harassment or discrimination, but could very easily escalate to that if left unchecked. And then increasingly, as we're dealing with this kind of ongoing pandemic, and we don't know when things are going to end, companies need ways to deal with COVID-19 issues. So are people appropriately socially distancing as we open spaces back up again? Are people following protocol? Are people doing what they need to do to keep others safe? And so we've really expanded Spot in the last 6 months to be almost entirely customizable, to take kind of the secret sauce that we have, which is this neutral, non-judgmental bot that acts as a go-between between the company and someone who's speaking up about an issue anonymously. And we've just applied it to the broad swath of issues that employees might need to raise. Wow, 2020 has been a year. Spot is distributed. So we're based primarily in Berlin and then the San Francisco Bay Area. Obviously, one of these countries is doing much better than the other when it comes to the pandemic. So our team's kind of daily lives are quite different, which, it makes for a little bit of dissonance, I think, when you're living very very different lives in the middle of something like COVID. But really the two biggest things that I think we've been dealing with are corporate reprioritization around the pandemic. So we have customers in deal flow kind of everywhere, but especially in places like the US and the UK and Australia and countries that have been hit really hard by COVID, right? There are obvious economic constraints, and the US is the kind of place where furlough isn't really a possibility. You kind of just have to keep chugging along and making enough money to keep yourself afloat. The second thing, of course, is Black Lives Matter. So at the same time that we're seeing economic constraints due to the pandemic, I think people writ large are also realizing that, you know, methods for detecting unfair treatment, especially unfair treatment based on things like race and color and ethnicity, actually matter more than ever. So there's a really palpable tension between the economic constraints that are kind of being imposed by COVID and this need for action on racial discrimination and racial injustice that has been made really, really evident by the Black Lives Matter movement. As a business, Spot basically has existed right in the middle of that tension. So the last few months for us have been, you know, what we do is basically intended to help people deal with the kinds of issues that lead to systemic injustice, right? To help people speak up about things that go on at work that aren't right. But we are also a business, so we are subject to, you know, the kind of economic constraints that we're seeing everywhere right now. And I'm glad to answer any questions specifically about that later, but that's about it.
Thank you very much, Jessica.
Sure.
Really interesting with the shift in how the things that are coming into Spot have changed so much, and from the customers' perspectives as well. Yeah. Lastly, we'd love to hear from you, Bibi, a little bit about Airmotion and your product WhoopiePlay.
All right, let me share my screen. Okay. Okay. Hello, everyone. I'm Bibi. I'm the chief air maker. I call myself that from Airmotion. So we are a respiratory health company. So about 3 years ago, we started thinking about air pollution and how that would affect, you know, health in children, you know, around the world. And again, you know, we look at how kids are not really being looked after, you know, in this type of environmental issues. And for us, we really, you know, wanted to come up with a product that could really make safe breathing for every kid. So a little bit of us, you know, we are a social innovation company that creates respiratory products and services with the least impacted environment so that more people can live and breathe better. So we started with the WhoopiePlay. Again, WhoopiePlay, you know, arrives, you know, with the typology of from a child's perspective, and on how, you know, we could actually bring the child into the world, you know, of climate change and how they would be known from young, you know, how to really protect themselves against the environment effects. So WhoopiePlay was conceived in that sense, you know, as an educational product, but again, you know, serve a purpose of getting parents and kids to interact with each other, and again, and learn more about how they can actually protect themselves. Yeah. So again, we always know that.
Bibi, sorry to interrupt. Bibi, sorry to interrupt. Your screen looks a little bit weird. Is it possible for you to maybe do the full screen again? We can't really see what's on your screen.
Okay.
Just maybe try one more time. Perfect. It's there.
Can I see that again?
Yes, we can see it like that. So maybe just, yeah, maybe it's not supposed to go to full screen, or I don't know.
Okay.
It looks great now. Yeah, thank you. Sorry.
All right. Okay. All right. So WhoopiePlay, we from our observation, you know, kids are happier. They have the freedom to go out and play. So for us, we really wanted to create something that is, you know, like colorful, you know, and again, you know, recyclable. And you know, we came out of this new air filter that's that sort of HEPA filter is folded in many times. So in a way, it reduces the surface area. I mean, it increases the surface area, but in a very compact format and modular. So the whole idea here is it's like Lego. You know, we're getting parents and kids when they get the mask. It all comes in pieces, and the kids and parents start putting the mask together. And again, we have this booklet that comes with it to tell you about air pollution. You know, who are you fighting with? So it's like a story takes them through. Yeah, you can see them. Yeah, you can't destroy them. So who are they? And again, you know, getting parents and kids to be involved in all this. Yeah. So again, the whole idea of discovery to play, total hands-on approach. Some of the parts, you know, you could even customize your own mask, you know, by stickers or even markers painting onto the mask. And again, at the end of the day, you know, we want the kid to have something they could actually own, you know, and call it their own. Yeah, some of the awards that we've gotten. Yeah, and along the way, as a company, we have developed a lot of products, you know. On the far top right, you know, you can see there's a mask that is sculpted to a 3D sculpt to the dog, the face of a dog, and even come up with other stuff that complements the mask that we have. Yeah. So that's about us, and during this period on pandemic, you know, we got a lot of people reaching out to us. I mean, in a good and bad way, you know. We, to be frank, we were caught a bit on our back foot. You know, we didn't know how serious this would get. And it all started, you know, when we got so much people asking us, you know, can you ship masks, you know, to different countries? Are you ready to do all that? And again, our production is all in China, and over the past few months, there's a lot of changes in terms of, you know, how the standards are being set, and how the Chinese customs are really restricting masks going out of China in a way that there's a lot of companies who are previously not producing masks and are beginning to produce masks. I think, you know, in a good way, we're looking at, you know, more people are starting to get aware of the importance of having a mask in times like this, and for us, you know, this is something that we could not do it alone, and we see this as a huge opportunity, you know, where a collective effort is being done. Some may not have done it the right way, but overall, I think it's very comforting to see that people are becoming more aware, and for Airmotion, we see our job being much more easier in the future, you know, to really bring products that people could really find it to be useful and effective. And for us, we are continuing to grow. You know, we are still a small team working out of Singapore and Beijing. But again, you know, during this pandemic, and we learned a lot, and we are growing a lot as well. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Bibi. Yeah, it's you had a product that really just fell into what people needed, and with the educational part of it too, I think it can go really beyond, as you say, and maybe make it easier for you guys also coming ahead. So now I want to dive into some questions I have for you guys, and they're actually for all of you, but I'll just start by guiding them to each one of you. And again, you viewers out there, if you have any questions, just leave them in the chat and we'd be happy to talk about them as well, or if you have anything you want to share on learnings and insights and stuff. But I want to start by asking you guys, you talked a little bit about how your companies have been doing. How has it been personally for you leading a company during this time of crisis? Can we, I want to ask you, Dan, first.
Yeah, thanks, Ditte. It feels a little bit like a trick question, right? So only because it's a team sport, I think. I guess what we've found is that we've been the whole company has had to be involved in that leadership process and decision making and really democratizing how we go through this, because it's not individual to any one of us in the company in terms of like this pandemic and the crisis. It's everyone. So everyone needs to have a say on how they feel safe to work, where they think the company should go in terms of direction, and how they have a real part to play in that. So I think it's, yes, everyone's had their own individual stresses. I've been stressed, we've been working hard, you feel it personally. That cannot be denied across anyone. But it really, in terms of how we've addressed it, it's really been a sort of hive mind approach and opening it up in a way that perhaps we wouldn't have under other circumstances in such a strong way.
Yeah, and I could see you other guys who were nodding to that, the fact that it's not a individual thing, it's a team thing. Does anyone have anything to elaborate on that? Want to say something?
Sure, I will. I think, at least for me, so as I said, my team is distributed, so COVID didn't really change how we worked, but I think it changed the amount of time that we spent together, because there was a solid 2 months where I think others have alluded to this too when we were chatting before the webinar, where no one was really getting in touch, right? You weren't doing nearly as many customer calls, you weren't doing nearly as many kind of external facing things, and so you kind of turned inward and spent a lot of time together. And at least for my team, that ended up being, while stressful because you don't know where things are going, that ended up being a very positive experience.
That sounds really great. I've also thought a little bit about during this time how this must, for some of you, have made you reevaluate or rethink or reaffirm your product. I'd like to ask you, Sahra-Josephine, has that been the case for you? Have you reviewed your product much more, or how has that been?
Yeah, definitely. I think that when you see, so for us, going from 100,000 users to having 1.8 million on a wait list, that stress tests your system. So of course we had to like do boring stuff like expand our server capacity, but also it gives us very immediate customer feedback. So for example, we've had to do new things like integrate Zoom directly within our system. So I think in that sense, from like a product perspective, it's a really big privilege to have that much usage at one time, and still, still so early in the product life cycle that we can make some good decisions. So it certainly has, we've had to add more languages. We've had to add more languages to our website. We've had to automate a lot of the processes that were too handheld because it just doesn't work like that. But I think if we go back to sort of the business and the personal perspective, I think I've had to rethink what it means to be a leader and what is a good company offering. So now we're 35. We just added 25% of our workforce that we never met, not from any office. So growing like that is also, it's a bit tricky, but I have some incredible people that have come in and done things like surveying and anonymous surveying that said, are you happy? What can we do to make you happier? And they say things like, can you guys, upgrade our internet? Or I need a better office chair at home. So all these things that we think a lot about the physical space, and what the physical space and that, what is, our sense of belonging to that space, what is being present and what is connection, and how do we ensure that people still feel that connection to each other and to our values when they're at home. And I think that there's been some incredible places to look for information. I'm a part of a lot of Facebook groups. One is called Pandemic Pedagogy, where there's 31,000 teachers that share their thoughts and ideas. I'm a part of a big community with something called the United World Colleges, where people were really fast to post what is the thing about my employer that has made me most grateful. And then I just stole from there. So everything we could steal that people wanted their employer to do, we basically are, implementing as much of it as possible. And then we have a long-term list. So I can't afford to get everyone private healthcare insurance right away, but we're transitioning towards that as well. And we're saying now is the time to standardize. We have better terms at the Danish office compared to the Peruvian office and the Vietnamese office. And over time, that's not a sustainable solution. So we need to bring everything up to par.
Yeah, thank you. It must have been weird for everyone who's been starting a job during this pandemic. And I really like what you said about the physical space being altered and how we attach to that. Bibi, you spoke a little bit about your product before. have you, you've almost already have a product that's perfect for the situation we're in, I guess, but how has it made you relook at your product as well?
Yeah, most certainly. And again, there have been a lot of different products in the market. We look at how different countries are saying that sometimes mask is not from the beginning. You don't have to wear mask to later part. You have to wear mask, and even any coverings to your face would be good enough, better than none. So it really took us some time to rethink about the way we approach the problem. It was from an air pollution problem, and now it's more like a virus problem. And we see that and sometimes the simple is better. So we are starting to relook at creating masks that is much more simple in its nature, probably like just a face covering, and approach it from that sense. Yeah, I think that's how we see ourselves evolving through learning. Yeah.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing how all these material things have. We've also, I think, all of us realized how we can actually work with the simplest things. So it's interesting that your product has you got that perspective on your product as well. There's also the thing going on right now with Black Lives Matter protest and the diversity subject overall. We are becoming more and more aware of the danger of biases, implicit biases especially, and all of this. Jessica, I would like to ask you, you've spoke a lot about this and beforehand we interviewed you for our trend report where you talked about it. Has this become, do you see this become a bigger topic for businesses, and what can you do to ensure diversity? That was a big question, but
yeah. I mean, to the question of whether it's become a bigger topic for companies, the answer is simultaneously yes and no. So I'm seeing two really specific things that are happening. The first is that people are assuming right now that because large swaths of the population are working remotely, that incidents of harassment and discrimination and bias are going down. Right. So I get people ask me all the time, they're like, well, if there aren't any offices, isn't it true that there's just no workplace harassment or discrimination? And the answer to that is no. Stress levels are really high, right? People are adapting to new working conditions and a new normal. I think the boundaries between work and private life are more blurred than they were previously because a lot of people are just at home all the time. And historically, at times of economic vulnerability, what we've actually seen are spikes in kind of inappropriate behavior and unfair treatment in the workplace. And I think that's largely because of, the stress that people are living under. So, we've really gone from having like physical incidents and encounters to like virtual and online incidents and encounters, right? So it's very easy to discriminate against someone over email or Slack or video calls. In fact, it can be much easier to do that because it can be easier to act online in ways that you wouldn't act in person. So we're seeing an uptick, I think, in incidents that would have been harder to get away with if there were bystanders present. While at the same time, there is leadership in companies who are, saying things like, well, if nobody's in the office, then it's probably not really a problem anymore. But to your other point, the second piece of this, I think, is that the Black Lives Matter movement has really broken open the and I say that meaning like in a positive way around race and racial discrimination. And I think, we owe, I think especially in the US, we owe like an incalculable debt of gratitude for that, because I would say before the Black Lives Matter movement, before the last few months, companies were just getting comfortable talking about gender, for God's sake, as my mother would say. So I think, I'm relieved that we can move past that, right? I think gender previously was the only protected characteristic that workplaces were willing to acknowledge with resources and funding and initiatives. It was the only thing that people were really comfortable talking about. So I'm I'm relieved to be moving past that and to be expanding the conversation, but to be clear, it's come at an enormous cost.
Yeah, that's the thing. And with what's going on, in your country, as you say right now, yeah, it's, but I think it's so important that you put highlight to working from home doesn't just eliminate. I think that's such an insightful thing for all of us, even though we may be aware a little bit. Dan, you talked in your presentation also about how Black Lives Matter have bordered over to the UK, and you mentioned a little bit it's also been on your mind. How has it been on your mind with your company?
I think mainly from our perspective, it's being a tech company at the moment, where we post jobs and things, like simple things like actually how accessible do you make how accessible do you make job descriptions and things to different people, like where you're placing them. So we previously have, as a startup that's been growing and with the need for skills, have put things out there without a huge amount of thought about in terms of sort of diversity going into it. Like I say that openly because it's something where we were like, we need someone to come work for us, and like we need them like as soon as possible. But actually what this has sort of started to change is a little bit of the conversation about like how do we place opportunities and actually consider who's filling those roles for our team to make sure that we are diverse and we have like lots of different viewpoints. Given that our target markets in the fishing industry aren't purely sort of Northern European markets, or there's a huge amount of the world that fishes all over the world. So we need to consider different viewpoints. Honestly, it's early days for us. I think it's been a bit of a wake-up call, but we're just sort of trying to learn as we go.
Yeah, I think it's about those small, tangible solutions you can begin with and then go from there. I would like to ask all of you, just by one, what has been the biggest learning you took away from all of this? Let's start with you, Sahra-Josephine.
Well, you can't take all your learning virtual and the world doesn't go under because I think teachers out there have been advocating for years that it's a discussion about, quality and pedagogy and it doesn't work. And even though, have you ever met a population more adaptable? We always say the opposite, but like no other discipline has, completely had their place of work changed as much as teachers have now. So I think that's absolutely incredible and outstanding. And if I can just add one comment to the discussion before, which I found just so interesting, I think that in tech, we have such an enormous amount of responsibility to really look at diversity and discrimination and racism. And we make mistakes all the time, even though we think that we're really, we're the good guys and we're not making mistakes. We made 2 huge fuck ups recently. One, we needed new dashboards with more data. And then I guess the process was too quick and some of the data guys managed to push where you could pick between 2 genders. And we experienced a massive backlash in just a few hours, and rightfully so, can I say that? And then I think on the other side, we've always talked about the power of conversation. So one thing is we sell these, learning systems to schools and private companies, but we operate a platform called the Lab, which is free courses for youth around 9 topics. Sexual education, discrimination, human rights. So we try to take the topics that no one wants to talk about. And there we see massive growth, especially around youth that want to have conversations about how they're different and have controversial conversation with each other. And I find that super inspiring. And of course, the fact that older people, eventually leave the earth won't solve all our problems. But I do have this hope that when we look at younger people today, they are way smarter than we were when we're their age.
Thank you so much, Sarah, and thank you for adding to that discussion as well. And good to share a mistake too. We all make them, as you say, and it's good to become aware of them. Bibi, what about you? What have you taken away from this, would you say?
I think over this period of time, I think one thing that I learned is, not to panic. I think that the idea of panic comes when you see certain opportunities or certain threats that's coming along the way. But I think as we grow, you lose some, you gain some. I think in every business, there are opportunities there will be lost, but then some doors will open along the way. I think at the end of the day, I think you have to just trust in what you do and do it better than the rest. constantly seeking that change. Never be contented with what we have, and that taught us again, not to be too rushed, to try to get ahead, but take it easy, yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much for that as well. Jessica, what's your take on this?
Mine is actually very tactical. So I think I've really learned to do sales. That is not my background. I really hated it at first, but given the sort of the speed at which everything, or the momentum, that kind of the economic constraints that everyone is experiencing, like our volume of sales calls went down enough in March and April that I was able to be on every single sales call, whether I wanted to or not. And I think that was a really valuable lesson. I learned a lot about customers' anxieties, both around COVID and around kind of the economic outlook of the economy and in the world, but also how people were reacting in real time to the Black Lives Matter movement and how they were feeling from kind of an organizational culture perspective. And it has definitely helped me to frame what we're doing less as, our product kind of versus corporate culture, and to figure out where the resonances are that we can, where we actually want the same things. That has been positive and good, even if it was painful.
So both a new perspective and a new skill. That's also very good to come up with. And Dan, what have you taken away from this? I know we talked a little bit about earlier, you and your company has been doing a whole thing with your team involved, and I think we would like to hear about that as well.
Sure, and well, actually, with that in mind, the whole team presence, I actually have the expert here with me, if it's okay to share the stage for a second. Nadia's here, who actually wrote that blog post, which you should all read, by the way. It's very good. We can share the link. But essentially, yeah, I think it was about trusting the team, right? I mean, do you want to talk more about what led you to the?
Yeah, well, I think it was kind of a company kind of stance in terms of transparency and the way we operate as a culture. But I think it was making sure that things and decisions weren't just coming kind of from the top down, but it was the involvement of the whole team. So yeah, I think that's what led us into the kind of structure that we had to make sure that the decisions we were making during COVID was in line with everyone's expectations as well, and coming actually from ideas they had generated.
Yeah, and I think a personal takeaway was just the magnitude of things that need to happen for behavior change, right? So we're all trying to do the best stuff. And I think we as a startup were like, rush, we got to do all this stuff. And things kept going in the status quo. And then COVID comes along and it forces us to take like a 2-month hiatus, essentially, and gives us the time to look at it. But it took this huge pandemic coming in for us as a seemingly reasonably self-progressive company to actually take a step back and address these things. And we've seen this across like air pollution changing. We've seen this across all sorts of stuff on a national level as well. And it'll be really interesting to see what persists after this, I think.
Yeah, I think at the end of the day, these big company decisions are quite hefty and overwhelming for any types of management. So in a way, in a selfish way, the more you can spread that across the organization, it's actually more helpful that way too.
Thank you so much, and thank you for joining in, Nadia.
No problem.
She wrote again, as Dan said, she wrote the blog post. I just shared it in the chat. I thought it was really inspirational to read. It's very tangible, hands-on. So save that for later to check out as well. We are slowly approaching the end, but I also want to get from all you guys here at the Index Project. We try to find ways to stay social, even though we're not in the physical space. We had a virtual Friday bar, which was very successful, people from all over. And I just want to end on a bit of an inspirational, positive note. What have you guys done to keep in touch with your team, and have any fun things popped up you have done, or anything like that? Let's start out with you, Jessica.
My team and I talk probably close to 3 hours a day. So we haven't really put anything extra or specific in place because every morning of my life starts with me talking to Berlin. But I think in general, we've tried to keep things, my team likes banter, and we've tried to keep it light when possible. We're working on some pretty heavy stuff a lot of the time, like dealing with, you know, companies' horror stories of harassment and discrimination every day can lead you to question the good in the world. So I think what we've mostly done is to try to keep our interactions with each other as positive and light as possible. And we give each other some space at the beginning of every morning when we're kind of getting on and syncing to just talk and like laugh a little bit and do silly Zoom things. And that has been helpful for sure.
Yeah, that's really good to have some way to deal with this stuff you are sitting with, as you say, on the daily. What about you, Bibi?
To be frank, we don't. I mean, we have been working from home. I mean, our model is working quite remotely, you know, having offices in Singapore and Beijing. And again, you know, we are a small team, and if you have WeChat, we follow each other on our WeChat. That's what we do, and what's happening in your daily life, you know. And I think again, social media plays a part, you know, to keep us together. And if something interesting pops up, you know, we just interact to social media. So I think that's how we got through these few months. Yeah.
That's good. WeChat is the place to go and talk about stuff.
Yeah.
And what about you, Dan?
We have a couple of rituals now. Weirdly enough, being a company based in the UK, we have an afternoon tea time that was recently instituted, which is just pure social chat. Like we check our sort of EQ ratings at the beginning of every week to make sure everyone's okay while remotely working, which is a great chance to catch up on people's lives and how they're feeling and get some support. But that's now moved to tea time. But the ritual that I would suggest above all is radio taiso. I don't know if anyone's done this, but this is like a Japanese daily exercise. It's 3 minutes long, and we all do it on Zoom together, or anyone who wants to. There's no obligation, but it's very active and it gets you ready for your hardcore day of sitting in an office chair. Basically limbers you up and gets you ready for that side of things. I can share a link later if people want it, but it's good. Recommended.
I think the Index team must be freaking out right now because we do the exact same video.
Yes! Amazing.
Yes, we do.
All right, we'll do it together sometime. We should
yeah, exactly. Yeah, we should share the link somewhere. I bet someone from the Index team has the link if you could share it in the chat. And last of all, Sahra-Josephine, could you talk a little bit about how you've been keeping up with your team?
Well, so we've been back in the office in Copenhagen for a really long time because we have a really big office and not a lot of people in Copenhagen. So I think we have like 280 square meters and 5 people in the Copenhagen office. So we can like sit in our own offices if we wanted to. But I think through the process, because they're back in Vietnam as well, but they're not back in Lima, I think we've done a lot of different things. We've had check-ins every morning, actually. I think some of us try to watch some of the same television shows, just like you would when you're at work. You're like, what are you watching? Like, what are you seeing on Netflix? And that way we could socialize around it. And I think we just call each other a lot, do lots of WhatsApp, a lot of private pictures we'd never really shared before. So lots of like activities with kids, and because you're home and that sort of professional line you had before gets a little bit more blurry than it used to be. And then I think we talk more. So I think sometimes my husband says, like, are you on the phone with Lisa again? And we'll call each other and I'm like, wait, why am I calling? I don't want anything. I'm just calling to say hi. And you don't really normally do that with your coworkers. So I think like we've gotten a lot closer, but because you kind of have to be able to sort of, I think we thought COVID was just like a blip. So we worked really, really hard and changed how we were working. And then we realized, okay, this is actually not going away. So we have to start talking about like health and mental health and how we're doing everything. But I think it's really brought us closer. And then I think everyone's just very excited to be going on holiday.
Yeah, it's nice to, I love that it's brought you closer. And yes, holiday is coming up, which is great as well. Jessica just shared a link for All Turtles' new video call app called I guess. And
it's called
and okay, yes,
yeah,
exactly.
yeah.
That's a little bit more so we'll that's the best. And there's also shared some Radio Taiso videos as well for everyone. But I just want to say thank you so much to all of our panelists today. I think this has been so enlightening. I think there are so many topics that were brought up we could have talked more about, but this was a really good insight into all of these things. I just want to say that I've shared a link to the support sessions, and I also have shared a link to our community group where the conversation will continue, and you can sign up to our newsletter. When you close down this tab, a survey will pop up, and if you have 2 minutes, please let me know if we can make these events better, what worked, what didn't, and so on and so forth. But I just want to say thank you so much to all our panelists. If you want to come and say goodbye all together. Bye.
Yeah, it's been a real pleasure.
Bye.
Thanks for giving us a
Yeah,
chance
thanks for
to
having us.
vent about 2020.
Yes, it has been like a kind of, you can say everything. So that's
Yes.
been really, really good. Yes, but thank you all so much for attending, and we'll be uploading this to YouTube as well, so you can share it with those who you think will be interested. Thank you all so much for joining today.